I think we'll get started. We have enough people in attendance. I wanted to thank you all for coming on this last day of Italian American Heritage Month. I think we have a really great program today, and I know our speaker has a lot of information to give you all. I may be clearing a little space on the local author shelf for those of you who succeed in writing down your memoirs or creating a fictional novel. Our speaker today, Tiziano Dossena, is a editor and is editorial director of Idea Press. He's written 11 books and more than 600 articles, so you know he has quite a bit of good information to give you. So I'll turn the program right over to you, and you can get started. Everyone enjoy. Oh, and please, I'm sorry, please keep yourselves muted, and there will be a question and answer period at the end of the program.
My Italian American life, the importance of writing a memoir. Now, what is the relevance nowadays of leaving information about your life, whether it is to your descendants or to society at large? And how do you determine which one to choose? Are we going to talk about ourselves, about family, about people that we know that were very close to the family? Now, the main thing that we notice nowadays is that oral tradition is disappearing. You know, in the old times, people used to sit by the fireplace and talk about what the family traditions were, what the occurrences in their life were. That's gone. It's been gone for a while. And with the new technology, the fact is that with globalization, family members tend to leave and to live far away from each other. So more so now than ever, it is important to find a way to leave information about your roots, your heritage, to be known whether to your family members or as a societal reference. Why is it more, should I say, why is it so important for Italian Americans? Italian Americans are a group of immigrants. The first immigrant was Christopher Columbus, obviously. He didn't know he was an immigrant in itself, but he was. And we come from all different backgrounds. In the movies, they tend to portray us as, ignorant people that come here and know how to do only a couple of things. And it's not true. Our immigrants have a vast knowledge of all different fields. We had immigrants that came here to resolve the problem of the silk and the cotton industry because they knew how to work the machines that were built in Italy actually to thread the cotton and the silk. So there was so many writers and philosophers, and also a lot of people, blue collar and agricultural experts and farmers. Yes, we had everything. So to minimize this, the importance, the relevance of Italian Americans, it's wrong under all aspects. Now, establish that when you look at your own family, not everybody has, a politician in the family or a doctor, so they feel that, oh, maybe my life is not that relevant to leave behind, but that is wrong. Well, for many reasons it is wrong. First of all, when you think about your descendants, whether you have direct descendants or you have nieces and nephews and grandchildren, however it is, when you think of them as, well, I'm going to leave the property to them and whatever money I did not spend until my last days of life. But that is not the most important thing you leave to them. You leave the details of your life, the importance of the steps you took in your life to bring you where you are now, and to give them the opportunity to be around. So for a person to look at their own life you start to look at it in a very different way, because your story, no matter how irrelevant may seem at the beginning, has its own relevance. It's more so for the people in the family. It may also have relevance for society at large, and that's something that we're going to find a way to establish. Or so you may be talking in, when I say memoir, it's a little bit deceiving, because you may not only be talking about you. You might be talking about a family member or about the family as a whole. When I say talking about, this is where the conundrum comes, where the dilemma comes. Oh, people say, I don't know how to write. Okay, let's avoid that step for a moment. This is not about publishing books. This is about leaving the information about your life, about your family, about the people close to you, for your family, for your descendants, for all the people around you that had some kind of relation to you. And if that works, also for society at large, which means also as a publication. So what information, so can you leave to people without causing problems? There are what they call shelter information. They have sensitive content, and I actually encountered that in one of the books that I will mention, that there was some kind of sexual abuse from one of the uncles, and it is talked about in the book. It is talked about in a very fresh, non-disturbing way, as much as non-disturbing can be an attempted sexual abuse. But it has been addressed. Not every time you can do that. There are times when people are alive and you don't want to be sued, first of all, if you're going to publish it. But if you leave it for the family, I believe you do have to leave all these details. If something happens, something occurs, it is up to you to bring the truth, if the truth is important to bring to the surface. Okay. Now, whether you want it to be published or to be kept as a diary for the family, that is a very difficult, but not impossible, dilemma. You have to remember that for you to be published, to make a book, there are different choices. You can write it, and that's up to you whether you are capable or you feel capable of writing it. And I mean, write it to the point where it can be just edited and put in the book. Or you can find somebody else to help you write it, whether it be a niece, a nephew, a child, a brother, a father, whoever has the capability of writing, or what they call the ghostwriters, which in this case is not really so much of a ghost, but somebody that helps you, assist you in writing this story. Or you can do it as a diary. And if you do it as a diary, the importance of your style, it's not relevant to the story. When you read letters from the family, you're not going to be concerned about whether there will be some grammatical mistakes or grammatical errors, or the sentence style, it may not be perfect, it's not understanding great, not Dante Alighieri. That is not a concern. If you do it as a diary, just to as a memento for the family, so that they know the stories behind you, or the older stories. Maybe you want to tell something that you know about your parents or your grandparents. Then if you do it as a diary, the style and the content, the grammar is not that important. It's not relevant. This is an important choice, whether you want it to stay within the family or whether you want it to publish it. Now you say, well, I don't feel that the story of my life is so relevant that it should be published. And this is where most people make the mistake, because the relevance is very ambiguous in this case. If you read novels, for example, you're going to find out that the stories are not necessarily about, heroes, World War II, but they might be talking about someone that just lived next door and with the details of their life and love story or whatever else, what are the dramas and tragedies and problems they had to solve. And this is what the book is about. So our stories are always unique, no matter how simple our life may be. Our stories are unique. So if you decide to publish it, there are many ways to do it, but you can always do that. So that's an option. But how do you collect the information and keep it orderly for a book project of any kind? Okay. The important here is to keep physical document in an orderly manner. So if you find, for example, if you're trying to tell a story, not about you, but let's say about your parents, and you find letters and you find documentations, you have to start to make files. I mean physical files. I don't mean computer files. To make files for this documentation to be stored in some kind of orderly fashion. You have to make a list so that you don't find yourself with a lot of documents that are confusing you. Okay. Now you also need to verify information. Okay. What do I mean by that? Let's say you find a letter or a note saying something, I don't know, a letter from your uncle saying to your father saying that you should not have killed the next door neighbor. This is a drama, tragedy. But was that true, or was that some kind of innuendo? And if you do some kind of research, you find out that the next door neighbor was not killed. It was just that they got into a fight and your father decided to beat the crap out of him. But in the letter, he said that he was killed. So before you divulge information that is not correct, you have to verify the information. Now, also, when you're preparing, whether you do it as a diary or whether you do it as for publication purpose, you should write an outline of the story or what you want to tell. The reason that you do that is because if you don't have an outline, you're going to get very frustrated by all the obstacles you're going to find in writing the story. Well, again, even if you write it for your own family, even if you write it as a diary for the family, if you write an outline, it will allow you to follow a path to reach the final goal. Now, when you write an outline, you're going to find out that while writing the story, the outline is going maybe expanded, but that's something that you adjust. But if you don't have an outline, if you don't have a structure, a skeleton upon which to put the clothing, your structure is not going to stand, and therefore you're going to get frustrated. You're not going to finish it. Now, another way of doing is to do a recording. People always think, this has to be in writing. No, it doesn't have to be. Especially if you're going to leave this to your family, descendants, you can just do tapes. Again, I would suggest prepare an outline first. And then you, based on that, you do a set of recording or tapes. I would say duplicate them when you do, if you do them on a computer or if you do them with a tape recorder, however you want to do it. I know people, friends of mine that did it on a tape recorder and then they lost the tapes. Things like that happen. You don't want that to happen. So I suggest you get yourself a tablet. If you get to use it, it's very easy to do a recording on a tablet and you make documentation, and then with the USB, you can duplicate it and put it on your computer. This way you have duplication of all these tapes. And you can also send it at the end if you want to. You can send it to people, make a big file and send it to your descendants, whatever they are, the children, grandchildren, and whoever they are. So you can do it by tape too. So it can be done. Now, if you don't do it by tape, after you have prepared the structure and after you start the writing, now you have another obstacle, which is images. If you are going to make it for the family, you just put the pictures in the diary and explaining what they are with references. That is a pretty straightforward solution. But if you're doing for publication, you're going to need to scan the pictures and keep them in an orderly fashion, especially if you have a lot of pictures. Scan the picture and keep them in an orderly fashion is a very nice statement, but most people don't know what I'm talking about. After you scan them, and you can scan them very easily nowadays, a scanner, most printers have a scanning system. You scan them in high resolution, which means you want them as big as possible, because when they get printed, they need that characteristic. And you have to give the file a name and a number. The name and the number will allow you to find them and to keep them in an orderly fashion for book presentation or for the book itself. Now, when you choose picture, remember the relevance of the images. Okay, so if you're talking about the family and whatever the stories of your family is that you're going to talk, or you want to talk about yourself, it's nice. Let's say you talk about yourself and you're going to have a picture of you when you were 6 years old, or when you were 12 and you were 20, and if you're someone in my generation, maybe when you were 50 and now. That's fine, but don't have 20 pictures of you when you were a kid because you like those pictures. Now, that doesn't work. So it has to be relevant. So you have to remember that the book is supposed to send a message across. It's not supposed to annoy the reader. It says, well, why is there so many pictures of him at 12? No. So the relevance of the picture is important too. If you are doing it for publication, you need to create a structured directory for yourself. I don't know how familiar, and that's in the Q&A people can come across with that. If you do a structured directory, it means that you're going to have a directory in which you put in your outline, in a directory in which you put a subdirectory in which you put all the images, a subdirectory in which you put the chapters that, you know, whatever the chapters is usually based on a chronological order, but not necessarily, because I'll tell you, there's other ways to approach what they call the memoir. Okay, so what are the goals? If you're going to write a memoir, whether you do it or you find somebody to assist you, what are the goals of this memoir? Is it just for the use of the family? You know, maybe you do. You know, if you have 300 cousins, it might be easier to publish it than whether you do self-publishing or not. That's something we're going to go over. But it might be easier to publish it than to make a diary and make photocopies. So it's nicer, presents itself nicer, and it's easier, right? But what are the goals? Do you want to reach the family, or do you want to reach the public at large? Again, this is a personal choice. I can assist people. If they can contact me afterward by email or by telephone, and I can give them some more directive in that sense. But it's very important to choose. The moment you have chosen, you have to see whether you have the ability to write it. And that is something that a lot of people are humble and they don't consider themselves good enough to write, and they're wrong. Sometimes people can and will write, even though they don't consider themselves. Some people instead, they believe that they're great writers, and they are the only one that believe that. But this is something I can't solve for you. People find sincere people and let them, ask them whether you You put paragraph together, you put the story together, and you say, do you think that this can be published as such? Does it need heavy editing or whatever else needs to be done? And from there you can determine whether you can be the writer, or you should just write the outline and the story, and then get somebody to help you with the writing itself. Now, the other item that is important is what they call financial involvement. Now, when you talk about publishing a book, there are many venues. You can do it as self-publishing, and or you can use an editor. Okay, obviously, most of us are not going to be able to reach Simon & Schuster as editors or publishers. Sorry, as a publisher. Now, because of that, the choices are more limited. It's a small editor, small publisher, or self-publishing. Now, people believe the self-publishing is necessarily cheaper than by going to a small publisher who may or may not ask you to share some of the expenses. Some of them will not. Some of them will ask you just to share, like we do. We ask for a basic share of some of the expenses which relate to the pagination and the setting up. And some of them will ask you a lot of money. So you have to be very careful with that. You have to feel the ground and do some kind of research in that sense. But there are dangers also with the self-publishing. Why? Because you are determining to publish based on information that you may not have, which is you don't know how to do a cover, or you may not know how to do a cover. You may not know how to choose the fonts. You may not know how to paginate. You may not know how to put pictures, images in the book. Now, if you go and find people to do that for you independently, it'll cost you a lot more than finding a publisher, because an artist has got to make his day. He's got to make his living. So a graphic artist will charge you, and the pagination. So at the end of the story, if you are not a person that is very at ease with all these steps yourself, it may end up costing you more. And there is another thing. No one knows everything, which means that if I, as a person, as a knowledge of the publishing world, would I have to do a cover, I don't believe my cover will be as interesting and as nice looking as the one prepared by the graphic artist. If I would have to do pagination, which I'm able to do because I did in the past, my pagination will not be as aesthetically pleasing and as correct as the one done by a graphic artist who knows how to do that for a living. It's the same thing also with the editing. People say, "Oh, editing. I can get, my son or my daughter. They were good in English in high school. So let them edit it." Yeah, you can do that. There is a different level of editing available in the world. If you want to have a book published and you're gonna go through all those steps, might as well either you find yourself, if you start publishing, a professional editor, and that's one of the choices, or you choose a small publisher who has an editor and is going to assist you. Not only do what they call proofreading, because you have programs for proofreading, but to assist you in what may be errors in the chronological presentation that you have in your book. So this is an important part of choices. So we have to choose whether you can write it or you have somebody else to assist you, whether you want to be involved financially in this, you want to, how much you intend to spend to get this book out there. And yes, the other side of the story is that if your book does well, you're going to get your money back and make some money out of it. But I would say that 80% of the books out there don't do as well as we expect, because the problem with it is not because they are not valuable. It's not because they're not great books. It's because the market is saturated with books, and people do not read as much as they used to. People go online, and so it's good to have an ebook. So at least that you probably will sell more. But people go online and they go on TV, and they don't pick up as much the books as they used to. And there are, because of the population, the world population is increasing, there are more authors. So there are more authors and there are less readers. And therefore, you're not going to get rich unless you hit. It just happens that you got on the New York Times bestseller list, and then God bless you. But the average person shouldn't have those expectations. The most important thing is to bring the story to the people, if you want to. If you choose to do that, is to bring the story to the people. No one is going to get rich. The publisher is not going to get rich, but you're going to get your story across. Now, again, when you want to publish, you have choices: self-publishing, small publishers, large publishers. How do you reach a large publisher? And sometimes even a small publisher has a similar problem. You need an agent. You need someone that is going to represent you, because otherwise you're not going to even be heard. No one is going to respond to you sending a manuscript to Simon & Schuster. They are not going to read it. They're just going to throw it in the basket. So you need someone to represent you. That is a complicated step. I do not suggest it unless you are very determined to get there. It's going to give you a lot of frustrations, and chances are that it's not going to give you any results. I'm not saying don't do it, but I don't particularly suggest it. I would say before doing that, you would have to get people, professionals, to read it and give you a true review of your book, so that you know whether it's worth to do the effort to try to reach a large publisher. Now, when you talk about, I always talk about memoirs. It's a little confusing because, again, as I was saying before, when you say memoirs, you think of my story. Not necessarily. There are a different type of memoirs or different type of stories that can be listed as such. Okay. There is a fictionalized memoir, which means you get your story and you make it into a novel. Okay, that's one way. And then there is a straight memoir where you tell your story as it is. The approaches of one and the other is completely different. Why? When you write a novel, whether it's your story as a novel, you can be creative. So if you are describing, you can still have to stick to truth, but when you're describing your particular trip across the ocean on a ship, you can be more descriptive than your actual experience was, and you can be flourishing. And so I don't know what happened here. Okay. You can be creative with your descriptions, which you may not be as when you're in a memoir, because you have to be sticking to the details and the truth. So if someone that you met had a blue suit and you really don't want to say it in the story, you still have to say he had a blue suit, because that was the real story. That's your memoir. If you do it as a novel, you can be creative and say, he had a pink suit, whatever, But let me go over the type of books that you can do with these memoirs. For example, you have a memoirs that talks about themselves. I have an example here. Now, this is Gilda Promise Me by Cavaliere Gilda Battaglia Roro Baldassari. She's a great lady. She had a very interesting story. It's a three-dimensional journey of a universal woman. Gilda makes her way around the world and experiences the ups and downs of her career in civil rights and public service. She brings you into a conversation where her presence speaks to her past, weaving stories that attract and sustain attention while documenting a life. So She talks about her life in details. She was a movie star in Mexico, and she was involved with the choices of the education department in New Jersey, and so on and so forth. She was a honorary consul. So this is a very interesting story. Yes, this is a very interesting story. Not everybody has a life like Jill, Doctor. Okay, so here we go. There's another choice. Here we have this. Badala. It's some grief, some joy. Now, this is an autobiography, but because it changed some of the story, he actually changed it, he made it into a novel. So people will find a lot of the things that he says are exact to the point of his life, while a version, I can't tell you what it is, but toward the end, some of the solutions in his life are not accurate. He made it more interesting. He actually created a novel in which he talked about himself, and he still made it more interesting. So these are the two choices when you do a autobiography. You can talk about yourself and stick 100% to the truth, or you can make it into a novel, and then you don't have to stick exactly to the truth. Now, there is another interesting book, which is George Washing Machine Portables and Submarine Races. Here it is. It's by Michael Cutillo, a dear friend of mine, and it's a story of his father. They are collection of short stories, and this is something you can do. You don't feel like writing a continuous novel or a continuous story about yourself or the family, and you can do it in short stories. Particular events are attached to each other, because to attach the events, it's very difficult. It is something that requires a lot of brain work and a lot of knowledge of style to tell the story of the life of a person or of a particular period. By doing short stories, you're actually telling particular events that involve this person. Now, he wrote it about his father. His father passed away this year. I'm very sorry. It was a very interesting man, and this proves the love. And this is all about being Italian American. It's about mispronunciations, misconception, misunderstandings, funny stories about eating, and so on and so forth. So this is another approach. A different approach that was done by me, actually. This is my own book. It's a memoir, but of my father. It's called The World as an Impression, but it is not his life. It talks about, my father was an artist, and he talks about his landscaping work. So his landscape pictures. So I took something out of his life as an artist, and I talked only about that. So you can choose something about the life, whether your life, you're a pastry chef, and you want to talk about just that. Not about you as a father, not about you as a mother, or whatever you were as a child, but as a pastry chef. So what I did is that I talked about his landscape work, and obviously this is an illustrated book. It's got pictures inside. The difference is that this is also a bilingual. Why was it bilingual? Because a lot of the people to whom this book has gone do not know English, because they live in Italy, because they're still living and they are related to him. So my decision, and that's something you're going to have to determine for yourself, my personal decision in this case was to make it bilingual so that we can offer this book to the family members, the friends in the United States, that's where he was known very well, and in Italy where he spent most of his life. Another one is, and it's something we didn't publish, by the way. I'm not trying to sell you our books. I'm just giving you examples. It's Letters from Italy by Mario Dell'Olio. What this gentleman did is he found all the letters from his father to his mother, and he discovered, and then he ended up talking to the mother, and he found out more information. He discovered that when they started dating, it was a long distance relationship between his mother and father. They didn't even know each other. The father had seen a picture of the mother. He had met her once, not knowing that she was the person that he would marry. But he met her once, and when he saw her in the picture, he fell in love. Now that's a story unto itself. But the letters are very interesting because they describe a particular period, a particular historical period. You're talking about when the fascists were there and the war and so on and so forth. So he was able to, Letters from Italy, he was able to describe the love story of his family. Through that, he was able also to give more information about himself and about his siblings and about the mother and the father. But the main column was just those letters that went back and forth from New York to Italy, and what they represented to the story itself. Okay. Another book, in this case, it's in Italian. It's the reason that it's Federico Tosti, Poeta Antiregime. The reason that it's in Italian is because translating it's very difficult. Not my text. My text is very easy to translate. But the fact is that Federico Tosti, was a poet who wrote in Italian and in Roman dialect. So the Roman dialect poems, even though I understand them, I would need someone who has knowledge of English and Roman dialect, very good knowledge to translate them, so that we can bring to the reader the meaning of this. But you say, what does Federico Tosti have to do with you? Okay, Federico Tosti, who I met when he was 100 years old, he passed at 104, was the father of a friend of mine. We ran for a political position in the committees. We ran together. We've been friends for 30 years. And when I met him, I spent a week at his house. He was such a great human being, and he was such a great poet. He could declamate his poetry at 100 by memory, all of them. Just you ask him a poem, and he would tell you. And so God bless it for his memory. But the reason for writing this book was not that he was a poet. We found the documentation, and we found all the poems that he had published. Some of them were published, but that he had written against the fascist regime. So we took a particular period of his life, of his writing, and we talked about that, what they represented. By doing that, we also discover, and thanks to my friend and her sister who lives in Italy, we discovered letters and notes and other documentation, and a couple of short stories were very interesting. They talk about his experience as an anti-fascist. So that's another example of how to approach a memoir or a biography, as you want to call it. It doesn't necessarily have to be you. It has to be about your family. It has to be about you. It can be about someone that was very close to you, that you feel needs to be talked about, and their story should not disappear. So this is the concept. Now, I am ready to answer any questions that people have regarding any steps of the story that we talked about. Anybody? Hello?
We're here.
Okay, I'm just making sure. I don't know who's here, who's not here. If you don't have any questions, I will explain further certain steps. Anybody has questions?
Tiziano, for me, right? This all seems very overwhelming. Even though you're trying to maybe have an outline and I don't even know where to start.
Well, and I say start from the beginning. So seriously, it's who would the person be that you would like to talk about? Is it your life, your parents? This is the question. That's the first question that arises. Do you want to talk about your family, about yourself?
Probably my family, right? That's the first.
If you want to talk about your family, the first thing that you got to do is to write notes so that you can prepare an outline. Okay, so say, what do you really want to talk about? What do you feel is relevant? Okay, the moment you have, and this is going to take some time, you're going to start to write notes. Let's say, your aunt did this and your mother did that. Your mother came from so and so. What difficulties they had when they arrived, all the immigration. I mean, all of us have immigration stories. My wife always makes fun that I came by boat. For example, she came by airplane. I came by boat. It was a luxury liner, but it was still a boat. So we do have always different aspects of our story. So you start to write down some notes. It says, my aunt did this, my mother did that, what difficulties, and you start to make some kind of structure in there. The moment you have the notes, you can start to make an outline of what you want to reach as a final goal about this story. So do you really want to talk about your parents and yourself, or you want to talk about the extended family, or you want to talk about the difficulties maybe they had when they were in Italy before, or you want to talk about the American experience? These are all, I cannot give suggestions specifically because I don't know the story, obviously. So these are all options that are there. And you cannot take decisions until you start to take notes. If you were there to say, oh, I want to talk about my parents. Okay, that is a very generic statement. You rather write down what is there that I can say about my parents. Can I say it in more than 3 sentences? Because it all depends on the relationship you have. Also, the other step is, do you have documentation? Do you have letters? When I say documentation, it may be confusing. Do you have letters? Do you have pictures? Do you have notes? Do you have certificates? Marriage certificates. In Italy, for example, they had Stato di Famiglia, which is they would say all the members. You go to the comune, you go to local town, and they will give you a piece of paper certificate. They will tell you how many members of the family were there, who was born where, and if they were dead, and so on and so forth. So all this documentation, if you have tickets from a boat, or do you have some kind of documentation, vaccination? I don't know. When I came, they vaccinated me for yellow fever, for example. I have it somewhere. That is a very unusual thing, but it was done in those times. And I'm sure that if people look into the parents or grandparents' story, they're going to find papers like that, maybe in the attic, maybe in the suitcases somewhere, or maybe in a lost drawer. So the documentation is the relevant point to substantiate and to complement the story. That's what it's going to. It's a labor. It's a labor of love, but it needs to be done systematically so that the children, the grandchildren, and nieces and nephews will be able to understand the story The story is not going to be just, oh, you know, your grandmother did this and that. No, there's going to be a story attached and documentation, maybe pictures or whatever it is, that explains all those steps, you know. So it is challenging, but it all has to do with the approach. Whether you want to do it for the family, that's a little easier. Why? Because you're not concerned about the style and the structure itself as much as if you do for publication. So there are two different roads that need to be chosen. You may change your mind, by the way. You can do for publication, you say, you know what, I'm not going to publish it, I'm just going to keep it in the family, or vice versa. You find out that after you prepare it for the family, you have a very interesting story, and then you do for publication. But you have to choose somewhere along the road. This is like your GPS. You have to create the GPS story here so that you can follow some kind of path. And then if things change, you find out there's too much traffic somewhere, there's an impediment, you change your route, you change your way of approaching, but you still need to start. And it shouldn't be overwhelming in that sense, because you know your story. You're going to find out, if it's not your story, it's your parents and your family, that even though you are preparing something for somebody else, you're going to discover other things, other stories within the stories, by asking questions if the people are alive. Sometimes, let's say your parents are not alive, but you have an uncle or an aunt that is alive, and you ask them questions. And you'll be able to fill all the holes, the missing holes, and you're going to be able to discover something that it's not only going to be useful for the other people, but it's going to give you an idea of your roots and your heritage. It's going to be strengthening your love for your family, because you're going to find out things. Because unfortunately, right now, nowadays, we tend to be to get lost. You know, we have TV program, we have this, we have that, and you know, there's something on a computer, and people are always on the phone, and we don't spend time on the family. We don't spend time on the love connections, and we're always assuming, and that is the big problem. There's always a tomorrow to do it. And I tell you this, I confess this, my biggest regret is that I was not able to convince my brother-in-law to write a memoir. My brother-in-law was the head of the partisans in northern Italy. He was the liberator of Milan in World War II. He was the one that surrounded Piazza Loreto and made sure that they would take down Mussolini and all the other people, because he said, I don't care what crime they committed, nobody is treated like a pig. And he took them down, and they say the Americans did it. It's not true. It was his troops that did it. All these stories I heard, you know, he was shot by the Nazi, he was put in the hospital. His brother, who was a writer, wrote that in a short story. But his biography, which would have been greatest thing in the world, being a relative and being such an idealistic person, was never written, because he told me, Tiziano, don't worry about it. When I retired, I'll have the time. You know, he was a congressman and medical doctor. When I retired, I'll have time to do it. Guess what? The year after he told me that, he got Alzheimer. That was gone. So for me, I was willing to do recordings, not to write it down. I wasn't even attempting to write a story, but to do recordings and talk about things that he used to mention sometimes to me, a lot of stories, but I wanted to put it in some kind of physical archive so that eventually story could be told. That is my biggest regret. I would like nobody that's listening to me right now to have that regret. If you have relatives that you feel that have stories, whether it's your parents or your uncles or your brother, and whether you have your own stories to be told, they should be told. Whether they stay in the family or whether they go out there, that's two different stories. But they should be told. So if it's for the family, so that the family knows. And if it's for out there, it's for the world to know. Okay, Terry?
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi.
Yes, I know you.
If you write memoirs, somebody's memoirs or your own, and you take the liberty of embellishing things or just to make it more creative,
Yes.
or just maybe not know enough about the real facts that you fill in your own, at what point does it become a novel and no longer a memoir because a lot of the facts are not facts?
Okay, if the embellishments are only descriptions, and I mean, how important is it that if the train arrived at 5 or 7, and the train was electrical, you can make mistakes even in the writing, not knowing. That doesn't really count. It does not change anything to the story. The essential part is that you do not change physical occurrences between the people. Okay, so if the person in the story was 15 at a particular stage of her life, and she was moved from one city to the other, you have to stick to that. You can't change it. Then you can do one thing. You can put an initial for the name of the city. You can put initials for the name of people, but you got to stick to the story. So people are not going to be happy because they know they're going to recognize themselves. For example, let's say there was, and in this case, for example, Letters from Italy, there was some kind of sexual abuse from one of the uncles, and he puts the name down. Now that's a very risky step. Okay. Now I don't know why he didn't get complaint yet, but that's not the story. I guess he's dead anyway, the uncle, but nobody else complained about it. Maybe the children knew and all that, and they let it go. I personally would not have done that. I would have put an initial so that C or B, whatever it is, so that you avoid the possibility of finding yourself in court with libel, and also you avoid the friction. You don't want to start a war within the family by doing that. If you stick to the facts, you can always make it a biography of the person, or you can always do based on the life of, which means that you're telling the story and you're going to fill some of the gaps. Okay, you're going to make it is a novel, but it is not, because even though by name it's a novel, but it's based on true facts. So they do that with the movies all the time. If they would stick just to the basic facts, sometimes the movie would not be aesthetically as pleasing.
Yeah.
Okay, so they add something, but they say based on true facts. So I would say it's the safest way. If you're talking about people that have lived here, they will be in the 80s or the 90s. You're talking about people that are gone now. Like in your specific story, I know you wrote a beautiful book about your aunt and your mom, and you don't have certain specific spot to fill, and you're going to fill it because you need to. You don't want to leave that blank. I would say novel, but based on real facts or true facts of life. I would say that's the safest approach.
May I say something about getting started that the woman before asked, where do you begin?
Yes.
Based on my own experiences. Yes. I got started by listening to the stories of my families, and in my case, my mother, who just always talked about her life, and her sister. And I found that certain stories were repeated over and over again to a point where people just ignored them. And when I did approach people and say, tell me more about that, that opened up the floodgates. And then when that actual story got written down and other members of the family read it, they were shocked. And she would say, but I've been telling you this for years. Like, nobody listened to me. But there's something about seeing it on paper that just gives it such credibility and an understanding, and also a lot of controversy because other people may not have seen it that way. So I think the best way to get started is just really to listen to other people or yourself, the story that constantly runs in your head that you say, I should write a book about that. Start small. And when you start small, it just grows.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, hi. Can you hear me? My name is Donato
Yes.
Vaccaro.
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much. I just wanted to say this has been really helpful. I agree with other people were saying, and yourself, in fact, that it's very challenging to do this. I've been aiming to write a story about my family. My family came to Eastchester 100 years ago, 4 grandparents from Italy. So I'm determined to do this, but I found it so many obstacles along the way, being busy all the time and stuff. And even a lot of what you were saying about, I mean, there's so many ways you could do it. And I've always got stuck on like how to do it. I like that. I really appreciated what you said about, telling it in short stories instead of trying to tell this long narrative, because that's where I would get stuck. I always felt like I have an outline, so I followed that advice already. Thank you for substantiating my approach. And that was kind of on my own. I just figured I know how to do that, but just really understanding like where you're going to go with it. And I'll just say one more thing. Like I found it really helpful that you talked about what you were just saying, in fact, about, making sure that, what your vantage point is. Like if I tried to talk about what my aunts and uncles have told me over the years, it gets really diluted because they don't even agree on what they saw. And I've actually had interviews with them. I've done I'm not trying to diss them. I'm just saying it's hard to even get people to remember what they thought happened, or what they don't even agree on what happened. So I feel like the best thing I can do is to write something to my children and to my grandchildren about what happened to me, because my story is interesting enough, I would say, and I don't need to cover stuff that there's really not substantiation, even though their stories I'll cover it some way probably. I just found it really helpful that you talked about writing short stories instead of a long story, and so thanks so much for your advice. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. But you said your story, that's great, but don't discount the fact also of writing those short stories if you ever want to. And if they don't have to be put in a book, you can always send them out for short stories, by the way, to be published. But your uncles and aunts, when there are discordance in the stories, people have different sides of the stories, you have to weigh it out by knowing the personality of the people you are dealing with. So you can figure it out if one has a different opinion just because they're defending themselves and they want to defend their name in the family, or is it just because it's their personality that some people say no to everything, so it didn't happen, as we know. So it's something for you to evaluate. Not necessarily you're going to be 100% on the truth, but you're going to be close enough. And the concept sometimes it's not who said what, who did what, but what the story is about, for the family. That this happened in the family. And there may be 2 different opinions, but this actually happened. You know what I'm saying? I mean, people can have different opinions on what happened, but basically the facts still remain. Something happened. If somebody died, whatever, whether they give him a heart attack or whether he had cancer, he still died. There's no, there is no variation on that. If you want to, you can put in whether he died of, but you can still stick to the story and just say he died. And that goes for any events that is in there.
Yeah, I think, thank you, because I think the point you're making is that it's really important to see where the common ground is, where the truth, where they all are saying the same thing. You can go with that. And you could also say, and Uncle Joe said this, and Aunt Anita said this. So there's ways of like bringing it all together. Because people, in my siblings, we don't agree on what we saw in 1960s growing up.
Right. The point is that the most important thing is to start. If you don't start, this is not going to happen. No one has time. You have, truthfully, no one has time. I used to have 2 jobs for 14 years. I still found time to run a magazine. It's what you want to. It's passion. It's whether you want to tell the story. If you want to tell the story, you find time to tell the story. You find the time.
I've
Okay?
been finding it helpful to write. I've been writing like 1-page pieces of memoir for a few years now. So I'm going to just have to bring it all together. But I have a lot of, I've been doing it, following your advice about like short stories almost.
Well, you
Thank
know,
you.
be aware of one thing. You know, you said it takes a while. The biography, the small biography I wrote about my father took me very little, but the book that is coming out next, it took me 9 years. Reason being, not the story only, is that pictures, he was an artist, find the pictures from 50, 60 years, 70 years ago, but also while you're writing the story and people know that you're writing the story, people will give you further information to fill in those holes. So
Right.
time goes by. That's why it's important to start, because if you never start, you never finish. So simple
I
as
hear
that.
you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do you hear me?
I do.
Well, I hear you, Mr. Vaccaro, but I'm interested in knowing, since I must leave this wonderful experience, if there is an organization in Italy or in different places or in one central place, where if you have the documentation from your mother who wrote it down, from aunts whom I wrote it down by, even with your own experience, Mr. Vaccaro, different attitudes and different ages of these aunts and uncles. I'm wondering whether we can validate it, knowing the cities,
Okay.
and what are the names of these organizations? And since I do not speak Italian, are there abilities to, and I am not computer conversant, are there opportunities to locate them, or can I contact you where you might give me that information after looking it up, or you have it at your fingertips? It doesn't matter to me, whatever way.
I don't have them on my fingertips right now, but I can tell you.
I know.
I can tell you 2 different approaches to your question. One will be for you specifically. One will be for anyone else that has some kind of computer literacy. So if you don't have any,
how I do it is different. Where I do it is what I'm looking for.
No. You have associations here in the United States that do that job. I actually don't remember off my head, but offhand. But yeah, there are associations that will do a search for you, and you don't need to speak Italian. Yes.
Well, I am not interested in this country's capacity to look up your ancestry. I have 27 branches already filled with my progenitori and where they are and who they married and the dates. What I'm looking for is validation of these places in Italy.
Okay, there are associations here that do that. For people that don't have, they can do search. Ancestry.com helps, but there are also ways to contact, if you speak Italian, to contact either the local church or the comune, depending upon when they were born. For example, in Italy, you have the comune, the city. You can write in English. Most of them will answer you. I mean, you're not trying to write a complicated letter. You're asking whether this person was born on such and such date and was died on such a date. You can write in English to the comune, to the priest also. Sometimes the comune doesn't work. The city doesn't work. Why? It depends on the date of birth of the person. For example, my grandparents on my father's side were born in 1860s. Very hard to find. I mean, you know, Italy was just created 3 years before my grandmother was born. So there's possibility that I might not be able to find documentation on that. And if she was born in 1857, which was not the case, I would never be able to find it through the government because it belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So you would need to go to the church for that. Okay, so to validate those dates. But there are, again, for you in this case, if you don't want to use a computer, but you have places where that you can pick up the phone and explain to them. You might need somebody, you might still need to go on a computer and send them an email with the proper name and explanations so that they have something to work on. But there are associations that do it. Now I don't know the name offhand. I would have to look because they keep on writing to me about that. So you can find them. Yes. Anyone else?
We had no other questions from anyone? Well, it was a very interesting talk, and I think it is a little overwhelming. So there's a lot to think about. But I hope you'll come back again and speak to our audience.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank
And,
you, everyone.